Then, from politics to pop culture to the people who teach your kids, talk radio sensation Michael Smerconish is showing you how political correctness is so out of control, it's putting a muzzle on America. All that, hot topics, and more coming up on Season 10 of The View.
Muzzle is here, but radio personality Michael Smerconish says that political correctness is running so wild that it's affecting everything from politics to pop culture to the very survival of America. Please welcome the author of Muzzled, Michael Smerconish. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you. Thank you, Barbara.
About being muzzled, but why do you think that we're being muzzled, and what kinds of things set off your alarms?
Well, I don't think it's a conspiracy. I don't think that it began with the Republicans or the Democrats or the conservatives or the liberals. I just think that over time, a feel-good mentality, begun with the best of intentions in every one of these individual incidents, has taken hold of society, so much so that it's in every facet of daily life, and I go so far as to say in the book that it threatens our ability to win the war on terror.
Yeah, can you explain that a little bit?
Sure. Well, let me first get there on a domestic level, because in my world, and I have 4 kids at home, we have 4 kids at home, and 3 of them are young sons. They all have far more trophies than I was ever awarded, and I was a fairly decent athlete in my career. But the difference is that my 4 are on a bookshelf, and I know that for which I was awarded those trophies. My kids, they get them just for showing up.
There is a trophy mania going on.
Trophy mania. It's rampant across the country because we want everybody to go home feeling like a winner. There was reference made at the outset.
So what's wrong with that? Really?
Well, that's not the way the world works. Well, because in life, not everybody's going to get to be on The View.
So how does it affect terrorism?
Well, I could give you a chapter and verse of incidents like that in everyday life. For example, if I sign any books, I use a red pen and I'm making a statement. Because in schools today, red is something that's frowned upon. Right. Instead, you should use purple, the color of Barney, because you don't want to hurt the psyche of a young person who's getting a poor grade and then has to see it in red ink. So
that's funny, because I would see like the red ink is like, well, I better get it together next test.
You should.
I think it's a good. I think the red pen's a good thing.
That's why I'm going to sign your book if you should ask me in red.
I would love to.
So you're wondering, how does this
affect the war?
How does this now translate into the war on terror? It translates into the war on terror because I think that same, you'll pardon me for this, sissification that has taken hold of everyday life is limiting our ability to win the war on terror. For example, Abu Ghraib. How many times have you heard about all the indiscretions that are committed against the prisoners at Abu Ghraib? When you actually analyze what's known, you'll find out that Mohammed al-Qahtani had as a form of his punishment the playing of Christina Aguilera music too loud in his cell. Ladies and gentlemen, this was a guy who, if he had his ability to do so, he would have been hijacker number 20 and cutting somebody's throat on Flight 93
Not to mention
over the skies of Pennsylvania.
Christina Aguilera is good. That's not the punishment.
So what I'm saying is that...
What are you saying?
What I'm
that
saying...
we should torture people with bad music? What?
No, what I'm saying is that we need to stop. We need to allow things to... Get tougher. Let things roll off your...
Torture them even more?
Excuse me.
No. I'm saying take into consideration who we're talking about. You're talking about a man who would have been cutting a throat with a box cutter.
He was a bad one.
Over the, well, they were all bad ones.
Yeah, but not all of them deserve to be tortured to the extent that they have been.
Listen, I'm for profiling, and I'm not afraid to say it. I believe that there's a common denominator to those individuals who threaten this country. They are followers of radical Islam, and I'm not ashamed to say it.
Most people, what you're saying, are afraid to say that nowadays. Are afraid to say, right?
Listen, I never set out to be an author. I wrote a book called Flying Blind because I had a travel experience with my young children where they were singled out for secondary screening at a routine flight to Florida. And initially I thought, well, this is the small price, I guess, that we all have to pay relative to the war on terror. But as I started to investigate that subject, I found out that was a feel-good measure, that we didn't want to offend people who we were really interested in. So consequently, we've decided we're going to pull out 10% of the people and just make it a random screening process. To me, that's a waste of resources.
Right.
Yeah, but then you have like an Arab American who's pulled out and detained when he was completely innocent. And so there is a give and take here that we have to look at.
There is a give and take. But
and also, what about Timothy McVeigh? He was an American terrorist who didn't look like anyone.
You know, I always get asked that question, those aberrant incidents, or Charles Manson. The whack jobs were with us before September 11, and unfortunately they'll be with us long after September 11. But what separates them from what we're talking about is this organized campaign by radical Islam against the United States. That's what I'm saying. I'll give you another example where, thank God, someone they were able to come to terms with their own concerns about political correctness. The Circuit City clerk in New Jersey who dropped a dime because somebody comes in to transfer a tape, and on the tape he sees individuals shouting Allah Akbar and firing weapons in the Poconos. Now, if you read the interviews that were done with this man, he said, geez, I had some trepidation before I reported that to the authorities. Yes. I hope I wasn't being discriminatory. And what was in his mind? The traveling imams were on his mind, no doubt, because some individuals were acting in a very suspicious fashion, and the passengers complained about them, and guess what? The passengers are on the receiving end of the lawsuit. So that's how I go from the domestic incidents, the trophy mania, the red pen, and 50 others that are in this book, to how in the war on terror, I think it's troublesome and it poses a real danger to this country.
There was one example you cited, too, of rescue workers who had to be trained in terms of diversity training before they went to go help Katrina victims, right?
There are guys who come 3,000 miles because they want to pitch in on their time for victims of Hurricane Katrina, and when they arrive,
why is this happening?
Well, Barbara, again, I don't think that it's an orchestrated campaign, and I think that each of these incidents, whoever said we should get away from red ink, probably was well-intentioned relative to our children. Yeah. But what I try to do is connect the dots and say it's gone a bit too far.
We were talking about Isaiah Washington earlier in the week, who was fired from Grey's Anatomy because he made a homophobic remark, even though he apologized and went to therapy and so forth. Is that an example of being too political?
No. You know, Potter Stewart once said relative to pornography, it's hard for me to define, but I know it when I see it. I don't defend what he did. I don't defend Mel Gibson. Listen, I like to have a couple of pops myself, but if I have one too many, I'm not going to blame all the wars in the world on the Jews. Michael Richards, I loved him as Kramer, but he went off the deep end because somebody heckled him, and it was end this and end that. I am not defending. Ann Coulter, another example, I would never defend. Absolutely. Yes. In fact, I've incorporated, you'll pardon me, what I call the muzzled meter. And Coulter gets a 10, and Gibson gets a 10, and Isaiah gets a 10. But that I believe that Don Imus said something boneheaded, and that the public flogging that he was enduring was punishment enough. And I had a difficult time accepting Al Sharpton and Jesse Jackson as the arbiter of good taste. And look what happened. Al Roker, you know, Al Roker is the guy who called for his dismissal. Have you followed what's up with Roker? Roker made a comment last week about folks with epilepsy. And all of a sudden now, you know, he's now apologizing and saying one of those phony apologies to the extent that I offended anytime you hear to the extent
I don't think you meant to offend, you know. But that's it, we're all afraid. Listen, I got to muzzle you. I really do.
Time's up.
Heaven knows what's going to happen, but we are a program that works on time, and that's the way. But this is fascinating, don't you think?
Yes,
it's a great book.
Yeah, so everyone in our audience is not going to be muzzled. You're getting Michael Smerconish's book, Muzzled.